the schools. I think we ought to pull out of all the countries and bring our troops home and let the countries take care of themselves.
That's Paul in Indiana. The human cost of the war in Afghanistan, the number of American service members killed through April of this year, 2,448, another 3,846 contractors, other allied service members, including those from NATO member states, an additional 1,144. Afghan national military and police personnel killed, 66,000, tens of thousands of Afghan citizens. Those numbers from the Associated Press. Earl is next, also in Indiana, Aurora, Indiana, Republican. What did the war in Afghanistan mean?
Well, yes, sir. I believe this is the start of Armageddon. It tells you in the last days, the people will riot in the streets. The young people rise up against their parents and stuff. We'll have destruction everywhere. We'll have all kinds of destruction. We're getting ready for the one world government, the one world church, because that's what the Bible says it's coming to. We're heading for the Battle of Armageddon. Right. Israel was made a nation.
Got your point. That's Earl this morning. This is Elmo out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Democrat. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. Good morning. How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Well, you know, it's all been about the money from the beginning, because you would never change those people. The minute you leave, you know, they're gonna follow like a cheap suit. I mean, it's just that's their culture. They're not gonna fight against their people. I mean, you know, Russia tried, as the gentleman said earlier, they left, same thing happened. So, you know, if we went in, we should have went in with a purpose and then got out. Because, and in truth, it's no great way to get out of a war. There's no great way. How you going to get out? You know, you say, well, don't say anything. Well, you think those people have been waiting 20 years. There's no way in the world they could have moved that fast. They're watching everything we do. So they know if they start seeing just leave and thought, they're going to know what's going on. So all this stuff about, oh, it could have been done better, it was going to be a mess trying to get out of that any kind of way. You could have waited.
20 years over 4 administrations. Does one U.S. president bear more responsibility than others here?
No, all of them bear responsibility, all of them. And it's because they listen to the generals. All generals want wars. They never want to get out of a war. Every time they try to get out of one, the generals raise up and say no. And also, like I say, follow the money. You got general contractors that have been making, defense contractors that's making all kind of money. It's not only corruption in Afghanistan, it's the corruption here. Because you got people got money in the bank that's making all kind of money.
That's Elmo in Indiana this morning. On that line for Afghanistan war veterans and their family members, this is Mark in Pennsylvania. When were you in Afghanistan, Mark?
Thanks for taking my call. Hey, this debacle that we're watching unfold is, you know, a slap in the face of our Gold Star families. You know, I've lost brothers in combat in both Iraq and Afghanistan. I did 3 tours in Afghanistan, and their sacrifice is being trampled on right now. I mean, this is an insult to all of us who have served. Our families have sacrificed. You know, I've been deployed 5 times myself and retired now, just retired this year. And like I said, you know, this is, you know, Joe Biden and the Democrats are cowards. And they and the generals in the Pentagon that have followed them. Everybody knew this was going to happen. I called this in April. I have a friend in Kabul right now. Okay? Like I said, this debacle, everyone knew who's ever been on the ground there. But you have generals in the Pentagon who don't frickin' go on the ground and do not listen to their officers and senior enlisted on the ground. And that's why this happened. And this is on Joe Biden. This is on Joe Biden, Aspen, and Milley. Those cowards knew this was going to happen. You cannot just walk out of Afghanistan. For one thing, the Brits found out they won't let you. The airport will be attacked, mark my words.
Mark, you said
Taliban will not wait.
You say you called this in April. Are you talking about the announcement that President Biden made in April about the September 11th withdrawal date?
Absolutely. I was talking with some of my brothers then. You know, we all said there's going to be a Saigon moment here. You know what? And it'll be within 6 months, because all of us know the culture there.
Was yesterday
and we know the enemy there.
Was yesterday the Saigon moment?
No, absolutely. I mean, the Taliban will have a ceremony at our embassy. Believe me, they're going to rub our noses in this. This isn't over yet. Okay, they know Biden's a coward, so they're going to start attacking Western Europe first, and then the United States again, because he's not going to do anything.
Mark, what?
And Milley and those generals, they're not going to do anything either, because they're nothing but politicians.
Mark, what years were you there, and what capacity did you serve in when you were there?
I was in there. I was in Afghanistan in 2009, 2010, and 2013. I flew tactical air vac. I was in the infantry before that in Iraq. So I've spent a lot of time working with Afghans and NATO forces, and everybody knew that, you know what, this commitment, okay, was not for 10 years, not for 20 years. It was for 100 years. Okay, after World War II, we're still in Germany and Japan, Western-type countries. Okay, 70 years after World War II. How long did you think we were going to have to be in an Islamic, Middle Eastern, or South Central Asian country? Okay, that's a century-long commitment. The American people have to start thinking long-term. The Afghans had a saying, you have all the watches, but we have all the time. Because we are a weak people now, we're not like the World War II generation. We're selfish and we're weak. And you know what? Our enemies have found that out, and we are going to suffer greatly, our children and grandchildren.
That's Mark in Indiana, Pennsylvania, talking about he knew this day was coming back in April at the announcement that President Biden made about the September 11th withdrawal date. This is President Biden's statements from April the 1st of this year.
I'm speaking to you today from the Treaty Room in the White House, the same spot where on October of 2001, President George W. Bush informed our nation that the United States military had begun strikes on terrorist training camps in Afghanistan. It was just weeks after the terrorist attack on our nation that killed 2,977 innocent souls, that turned Lower Manhattan into a disaster area, destroyed parts of the Pentagon, and made hallowed ground of a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and sparked an American promise that we would never forget. We went to Afghanistan in 2001 to root out al-Qaeda, to prevent future terrorist attacks against the United States planned from Afghanistan. Our objective was clear. The cause was just. Our NATO allies and partners rallied beside us. And I supported that military action along with overwhelming majority of the members of Congress. More than 7 years later, in 2008, weeks before we swore the oath of office President Obama and I were about to swear, President Obama asked me to travel to Afghanistan and report back on the state of the war in Afghanistan. I flew to Afghanistan, to the Kunar Valley, a rugged mountainous region on the border with Pakistan. What I saw on that trip reinforced my conviction that only the Afghans have the right and responsibility to lead their country, and that more and endless American military force could not create or sustain a durable Afghan government. I believed that our presence in Afghanistan should be focused on the reason we went in the first place, to ensure Afghanistan would not be used as a base from which to attack our homeland again. We did that. We accomplished that objective.
That was President Biden from April of this year, asking you this morning, what did the war in Afghanistan mean? And we've been taking your phone calls as well as looking for your tweets and text messages as well. Here's a few of those. MLB writing in, I don't know what this means because we aren't in Afghanistan. Will a generation of Afghans who have experienced a different life be strong enough to fight a civil war? We don't know, is what MLB writes. Alan Lawrence saying it means that we should have left a long time ago. And how many days are we going to talk about this? This from Janet in Florida. Unless the U.S. learns a lesson that starting misguided, unwinnable wars causes more harm than good, it will have meant nothing. And Donna Westbrook saying that the failure of Afghanistan to learn from all the U.S. soldiers that fought for them and to help them fight for themselves is what this means. Just a few of your comments from social media this morning. I also want to show you some newspapers from around the world. This from The Guardian out of the United Kingdom this morning. The fall of Kabul is the headline there. The museum headlines as well, with a few other newspapers from around the world, just to show you some of the pictures on the front pages. Belgium and Turkey, Saudi Arabia as well, with the graveyard of empires, the headline from Arab News this morning. From the United Arab Emirates, chaos in Kabul. From Israel this morning, the headline there with the picture of the Taliban fighters driving through the streets of Kabul. From Brazil, the headline as well about the Taliban in Afghanistan, and also one more from Germany this morning. Just some of the front pages, that German newspaper with that Getty image of U.S. helicopters over the U.S. Embassy in Kabul. Daryl's next out of Idaho. Independent, good morning. Thanks for waiting. What does this all mean?
Good morning, John. Basically, I was in the Marine Corps. I was supposed to get out September 29th in 1965, but everybody got extended September 15th. And I was only a corporal, so there was a huge pool. I had to stay in for an additional 4 months, and I got out in January. And then I go over to Men's Warehouse here the other day, and I'm buying a brand new shirt that's made in Vietnam. And everybody said, oh, the North Vietnamese, when they get in there, they're going to do this and do that. In reality, they united their country. And now here we are in Afghanistan, and for some reason or another, nobody understands the scriptures. It says in one of the verses that I will break the pride of your power. And then there's another verse that says, women shall rule over you. Look how this government, our country right now, is saturated with women in high positions, and what do? They bring more women in, and slowly but surely our country
you don't trust female elected officials?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking about that lady there in Chicago, Lightfoot. She's not only married to another woman, but we got this kind of a world going on, and the creator of the universe, he controls this stuff. You look at these lightning.
All right, that's Daryl in Idaho. This is Matthew in Emerson, New Jersey. Independent, good morning.
Good morning, and thank you. And here's the problem with Mr. Biden's unnecessary and precipitous, disastrous withdrawal. As both veterans and President Trump's statement mentioned, we have now lost our eyes and ears, our intelligence ability to prevent Taliban and ISIS from committing another, God forbid, 9/11 terrorist attack. And also, sir, the Taliban have now implemented Sharia law, which not only prevents girls and women from going to school, but it allows women to be stoned to death if they do not cover themselves from head to toe. And last, may God help the Afghan men and women who helped us, our forces, who are trying to keep us safe over there. They will now be subject to torture and killing along with their families because the ungodly Taliban and ISIS are merciless.
That's Matthew in New Jersey. This is Kathy in New York, Republican. Good morning. You're next.
Thank you for having me. We're focusing on Kabul today, and we failed. Face it. Meanwhile, we're being invaded on our own borders, taking our eye off the ball while Biden tries to figure out what's happening. We could have Taliban coming in here with the drove of immigrants. We don't understand other cultures, and we go into countries with nothing but ignorance, like we can save them from themselves with money. Let the Arabs, with all their opulence, handle their own countries. Thank you.
It's Kathy in New York. A bit of discussion, plenty of discussion this morning among viewers and on the Sunday shows yesterday about whose fault this is, where the blame lies for what happened in Kabul yesterday, what's been happening in Afghanistan for the past several weeks. Another voice on that from Congresswoman Liz Cheney was on ABC News this week on ABC and was asked that question about who is to blame. This is what the Republican Congresswoman said.
Who bears responsibility?
Look, I think absolutely President Biden bears responsibility for making this decision, but there is no question that President Trump, his administration, Secretary Pompeo, they also bear very significant responsibility for this. They walked down this path of legitimizing the Taliban, of perpetuating this fantasy, telling the American people that the Taliban were a partner for peace. President Trump told us that the Taliban was going to fight terror. Secretary Pompeo told us that the Taliban was going to renounce al-Qaeda. None of that has happened. None of it has happened. Today, As we watch the Taliban, for example, release prisoners across Afghanistan, there's very real concern that there are not just fighters in those prisons who will join the battle in Afghanistan, but that terrorist groups globally will, in fact, be fed new soldiers in their war on terror from those prisons. It's a devastating set of circumstances, but the delegitimization of the Afghan government, the notion in the Trump administration, the suggestion that at one point they were saying we're going to invite the Taliban to Camp David.
On September 11th.
Yeah. I mean, this disaster certainly began. And look, the notion of we're going to end endless wars, that campaign slogan, what we're watching right now in Afghanistan is what happens when America withdraws from the world. So everybody who has been saying America needs to withdraw, America needs to retreat, we are getting a devastating, catastrophic, real-time lesson in what that means.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney there on ABC This Week yesterday, talking a bit about the Trump administration and specifically...
Good afternoon. I want to speak today to the unfolding situation in Afghanistan, the developments that have taken place in the last week, and the steps we're taking to address the rapidly evolving events. My national security team and I have been closely monitoring the situation on the ground in Afghanistan and moving quickly to execute the plans we had put in place to respond to every constituency, including and contingency, including the rapid collapse we're seeing now. I'll speak more in a moment about the specific steps we're taking, but I want to remind everyone how we got here and what America's interests are in Afghanistan. We went to Afghanistan almost 20 years ago with clear goals. Get those who attacked us on September 11, 2001, and make sure al-Qaeda could not use Afghanistan as a base from which to attack us again. We did that. We severely degraded al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. We never gave up the hunt for Osama bin Laden, and we got him. That was a decade ago. Our mission in Afghanistan was never supposed to have been nation building. It was never supposed to be creating a unified, centralized democracy. Our only vital national interest in Afghanistan remains today what it has always been: preventing a terrorist attack on America's homeland. I've argued for many years that our mission should be narrowly focused on counterterrorism, not counterinsurgency or nation building. That's why I opposed the surge when it was proposed in 2009 when I was vice president. And that's why, as president, I'm adamant that we focus on the threats we face today in 2021, not yesterday's threats. Today, the terrorist threat has metastasized well beyond Afghanistan. Al-Shabaab in Somalia, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, al-Nusra in Syria, ISIS attempting to create a caliphate in Syria and Iraq, and establishing affiliates in multiple countries in Africa and Asia. These threats warrant our attention and our resources. We conduct effective counterterrorism missions against terrorist groups in multiple countries where we don't have permanent military presence. If necessary, we'll do the same in Afghanistan. We've developed counterterrorism over-the-horizon capability that will allow us to keep our eyes firmly fixed on the direct threats to the United States and the region, and act quickly and decisively if needed. When I came into office, I inherited a deal that President Trump negotiated with the Taliban. Under his agreement, U.S. forces would be out of Afghanistan by May 1, 2021, just a little over 3 months after I took office. U.S. forces had already drawn down during the Trump administration from roughly 15,500 American forces to 2,500 troops in country. And the Taliban was at its strongest militarily since 2001. The choice I had to make as your president was either to follow through on that agreement or be prepared to go back to fighting the Taliban in the middle of the spring fighting season. There would have been no ceasefire after May 1. There was no agreement protecting our forces after May 1. There was no status quo of stability without American casualties after May 1. There was only the cold reality of either following through on the agreement to withdraw our forces or escalating the conflict and sending thousands more American troops back into combat in Afghanistan, lurching into the third decade of conflict. I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw U.S. forces. That's why we're still there. We were clear-eyed about the risks. We planned for every contingency, but I always promised the American people that I would be straight with you. The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated. So what's happened? Afghanistan political leaders gave up and fled the country. The Afghan military collapsed, sometime without trying to fight. If anything, the developments of the past week reinforced that ending U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan now was the right decision. American troops cannot and should not be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight for themselves. We spent over $1 trillion. We trained and equipped an Afghan military force with some 300,000 strong, incredibly well equipped, a force larger in size than the militaries of many of our NATO allies. We gave them every tool they could need. We paid their salaries, provided for the maintenance of their Air Force, something that Taliban doesn't have. Taliban does not have an Air Force. We provided close air support. We gave them every chance to determine their own future. What we could not provide them was the will to fight for that future. There's some very brave and capable Afghan special forces units and soldiers. But if Afghanistan is unable to mount any real resistance to the Taliban now, there is no chance that 1 year, 1 more year, 5 more years, or 20 more years of U.S. military boots in the ground would have made any difference. And here's what I believe to my core. It is wrong to order American troops to step up when Afghanistan's own armed forces would not. The political leaders of Afghanistan were unable to come together for the good of their people, unable to negotiate for the future of their country when the chips were down. They would never have done so while U.S. troops remained in Afghanistan, bearing the brunt of the fighting for them. And our true strategic competitors, China and Russia, would love nothing more than the United States to continue to funnel billions of dollars in resources and attention into stabilizing Afghanistan indefinitely. When I hosted President Ghani and Chairman Abdullah at the White House in June, and again when I spoke by phone to Ghani in July, we had very frank conversations. We talked about how Afghanistan should prepare to fight their civil wars after the U.S. military departed, to clean up the corruption in government so the government could function for the Afghan people. We talked extensively about the need for Afghan leaders to unite politically. They fail to do any of that. I also urge them to engage in diplomacy, to seek a political settlement with the Taliban. This advice was flatly refused. Mr. Ghani insisted that the Afghan forces would fight, but obviously he was wrong. So I'm left again to ask of those who argue that we should stay, how many more generations of America's daughters and sons would you have me send to fight Afghanistan's civil war when Afghan troops will not? How many more lives American lives is it worth? How many endless rows of headstones at Arlington National Cemetery? I'm clear on my answer. I will not repeat the mistakes we've made in the past. Mistake of staying and fighting indefinitely in a conflict that is not in the national interest of the United States, of doubling down on a civil war in a foreign country, of attempting to remake a country through the endless military deployments of U.S. forces. Those are the mistakes we cannot continue to repeat because we have significant vital interest in the world that we cannot afford to ignore. I also want to acknowledge how painful this is to so many of us. The scenes we're seeing in Afghanistan, they're gut-wrenching, particularly for our veterans, our diplomats, humanitarian workers, for anyone who has spent time on the ground working to support the Afghan people, for those who have lost loved ones in Afghanistan, and for Americans who have fought and served in the country, serve our country in Afghanistan. This is deeply, deeply personal. It is for me as well. I've worked on these issues as long as anyone. I've been throughout Afghanistan during this war, while the war was going on, from Kabul to Kandahar to the Kunar Valley. I've traveled there on 4 different occasions. I met with the people. I've spoken to the leaders. I spent time with our troops. And I came to understand firsthand what was and was not possible in Afghanistan. So now we're focused on what is possible. We will continue to support the Afghan people. We will lead with our diplomacy, our international influence, and our humanitarian aid. We'll continue to push for regional diplomacy and engagement to prevent violence and instability. We'll continue to speak out for the basic rights of the Afghan people, of women and girls, just as we speak out all over the world. I've been clear, the human rights must be the center of our foreign policy, not the periphery. But the way to do it is not through endless military deployments. It's with our diplomacy, our economic tools, and rallying the world to join us. Now, let me lay out the current mission in Afghanistan. I was asked to authorize, and I did, 6,000 U.S. troops to deploy to Afghanistan for the purpose of assisting in the departure of U.S. and allied civilian personnel from Afghanistan, and to evacuate our Afghan allies and vulnerable Afghans to safety outside of Afghanistan. Our troops are working to secure the airfield and to ensure continued operation of both the civilian and military flights. We're taking over air traffic control. We have safely shut down our embassy and transferred our diplomats. Our diplomatic presence is now consolidated at the airport as well. Over the coming days, we intend to transport out thousands of American citizens who have been living and working in Afghanistan. We'll also continue to support the safe departure of civilian personnel, the civilian personnel of our allies who are still serving in Afghanistan. Operation Allies Refugee, which I announced back in July, has already moved 2,000 Afghans who are eligible for special immigration visas and their families to the United States. In the coming days, the U.S. military will provide assistance to move more SIV-eligible Afghans and their families out of Afghanistan. We're also expanding refugee access to cover other vulnerable Afghans who worked for our embassy. U.S. non-governmental agencies or U.S. non-governmental organizations and Afghans who otherwise are at great risk, and U.S. news agencies. I know there are concerns about why we did not begin evacuating Afghans civilians sooner. Part of the answer is some of the Afghans did not want to leave earlier, still hopeful for their country. And part of it because the Afghan government and its supporters discouraged us from organizing a mass exodus to avoid triggering, as they said, a crisis of confidence. American troops are performing this mission as professionally and as effectively as they always do, but it is not without risks. As we carry out this departure, we have made it clear to the Taliban, if they attack our personnel or disrupt our operation, the U.S. presence will be swift and the response will be swift and forceful. We will defend our people with devastating force if necessary. Our current military mission will be short in time, limited in scope, and focused in its objectives. Get our people and our allies to safety as quickly as possible. And once we have completed this mission, we will conclude our military withdrawal. We will end America's longest war after 20 long years of bloodshed. The events we're seeing now are sadly proof that no amount of military force would ever deliver a stable, united, secure Afghanistan, as known in history as the graveyard of empires. What's happening now could just as easily happen 5 years ago or 15 years in the future. We have to be honest. Our mission in Afghanistan is taking many missteps, made many missteps over the past 2 decades. I'm now the 4th American president to preside over war in Afghanistan, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. I will not pass this responsibility on to a 5th president. I will not mislead the American people by claiming that just a little more time in Afghanistan will make all the difference. Nor will I shrink from my share of responsibility for where we are today and how we must move forward from here. I am President of the United States of America, and the buck stops with me. I'm deeply saddened by the facts we now face, but I do not regret my decision to end America's warfighting in Afghanistan and maintain a laser focus on our counterterrorism missions there and other parts of the world. Our mission to degrade the terrorist threat of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and kill Osama bin Laden was a success. Our decades-long effort to overcome centuries of history and permanently change and remake Afghanistan was not, and I wrote and believed it never could be. I cannot and will not ask our troops to fight on endlessly in another country's civil war, taking casualties, suffering life-shattering injuries, leaving families broken by grief and loss. This is not in our national security interest. It is not what the American people want. It is not what our troops, who have sacrificed so much over the past 2 decades, deserve. I made a commitment to the American people when I ran for president that I would bring America's military involvement in Afghanistan to an end. While it's been hard and messy, and yes, far from perfect, I've honored that commitment. More importantly, I made a commitment to the brave men and women who serve this nation that I wasn't going to ask them to continue to risk their lives in a military action that should have ended long ago. Our leaders did that in Vietnam when I got here as a young man. I will not do it in Afghanistan. I know my decision will be criticized, but I would rather take all that criticism than pass this decision on to another president of the United States, yet another one, a 5th one, because it's the right one, it's the right decision for our people, the right one for our brave service members who risk their lives serving our nation, and it's the right one for America. Thank you. May God protect our troops, our diplomats, and all brave Americans serving in harm's way.
Mr. President, what do you make of the Afghans clinging to the aircraft? How can you take no questions on this?
There you saw President Biden live from the White House. The State Department and Pentagon are both scheduled to hold briefings this afternoon on the situation in Afghanistan. Here on C-SPAN, we'll take you to whichever briefing gets underway first. Until then, more of today's Washington Journal with your reaction to the events playing out in Afghanistan.
Then President Barack Obama from May of 2010, 11 years later, with this headline on the front page of the New York Times: Taliban capture Kabul, stunning U.S. as 20-year effort unravels in days. Asking you, what did the war in Afghanistan mean? Jimmy, Athens, Georgia, Independent. Good morning.
Good morning, John. This has been a great show this morning. To answer the main question, what does the war of Afghanistan mean? It means we did not learn the lessons from Vietnam, because we went into a war not doing everything, not willing to do everything it took or it would take to win it. And by that I mean using nuclear weapons. I mean, we easily could have won the Afghanistan war if we had been willing to use all our weapons that we have in our arsenal. But that's just not politically correct, so we decided not to do it, and we lost another war just like we did in Vietnam.
Jimmy, would you have wanted us to use nuclear weapons in Afghanistan?
No. I think we should never have entered that war to begin with, and I don't think we should ever enter a war unless we are willing to use nuclear weapons in order to win it, and that's my opinion.
That's Jimmy in Georgia. This is Pam, Burlington, North Carolina, Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning. The thing I have to say is, well, first of all, I'd like to thank our military serving now and the ones retired. I also am tired of hearing the blame, being put here and there. It's sad. It's really sad to see what's happening, and so much of it was unforeseen. So I just think that if the blame would stop, like the blame being put on Biden, and if you go to the RNC website, you'll notice that they took down the agreement that Trump had with the Taliban. And if you remember, he wanted to invite them here on September 11th of last year to Camp David. So I don't know where everybody's getting that it's all Biden's fault. He extended the leaving time from May 1st to a few days ago, and what would have happened then as compared to now, no one knows. But I think he was able to give us a little bit more time. So anyway, it's sad, and I'm just really sorry, and I hope that we can get the Afghans who gave so much aid to us over the 20 years out safely.
That's Pam in North Carolina. This is the statement yesterday from the leader of House Republicans, Kevin McCarthy, the California congressman, saying Joe Biden has been commander-in-chief for 7 months. The current failure in Afghanistan falls squarely on his shoulders. I asked President Biden to stop finding excuses for his own mistakes and address the country in person with how he plans to secure U.S. national interests, protect our personnel on the ground, and assist the Afghan allies who have helped us and prevent the resurgence of al-Qaeda. His lack of leadership during this pivotal moment has been shameful, Kevin McCarthy put in his statement yesterday. He said it has only served to embolden our adversaries and let our allies down. Waiting to hear from the president. We don't know when the president will be speaking. We don't even know if it'll be today or in the coming days, but a few things we are watching for this morning. Coming up in less than an hour at 10 a.m. Eastern, we're going to be taking C-SPAN viewers to a UN Security Council meeting on the issue of Afghanistan, holding that meeting in the wake of yesterday's events, the fall of Kabul. Again, you can watch that on C-SPAN at cspan.org. And then also a little bit later today at 2 p.m., we're expecting a briefing from the State Department and questions from journalists taken by State Department spokesman Ned Price. So that's what we know we'll be watching for today. Obviously, continue to check C-SPAN throughout the day for our coverage of other events as they do come up. In the meantime, your phone calls for the next 50 minutes this morning. This whole morning, we've been asking, what did the war in Afghanistan mean? Joe's out in Hawaii this morning, a Republican. Joe, how would you answer that question?
Yes. I feel that any type of death and destruction from war is useless. We should try to build other countries, but first build our country, the United States of America. We should aid people in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in their own countries, but not tell them how to achieve that. We should avoid putting all of our best minds and our money into all these foreign interventions. I agree with Donald Trump. Stop the endless wars and build up the United States of America so that it is truly the great country. Also understand why people don't like us. We are poor in human relations. Why did Al-Qaeda attack the United States? Why did Osama bin Laden hate us? We need to understand why people don't like us. We cannot be bullies that go all over the world as imperialists trying to tell people how they run their governments. Don't fight China, don't fight Russia. Just live in harmony, but be strong, and they know we can nuke them anytime if we want to.
Dalton is in Texas, an independent. Good morning. You're next.
Well, I called in as a veteran and not an independent. I hit Vietnam in 1968. I made the Tet jump to get our boys out. I know exactly what went on in Vietnam. It was nothing compared to what's going on now. I was on the top of the building when we lifted out in helicopters, and I was helping people get on. Soldiers, politicians, citizens. I was in all of it. But the Vietnamese did not stop fighting. The Vietnamese were not a bunch of thieves. They were fighting right up to the steps as they were getting aid and help to get away from it. Over in Afghanistan, they are the crookedest people in the world, and always have been. When we went over there, even in Iraq, we went over there because of the oil business. And I know that. I worked in the oil field and in the business for quite a few years after I got home. But we don't need to be over there in the Middle East, and we do not need to be supporting Israel over the other countries.
Dalton, can I ask you, you mentioned that you were there for the fall of Saigon. How close were you to this famous picture when it comes to the fall of Saigon of the Huey on the rooftop of the embassy?
50, 60 foot at one time. And I was Sergeant Major in Force Recon in the Marine Corps. And I know of the atrocities and stuff that took place over there.
Did you?
The stuff that's going on in Afghanistan is a bullying takeover from them and abusive. But it was nothing as bad as some of the things we saw in Vietnam when we got there.
Dalton, how did you eventually get out? Did you get out on one of those helicopters?
Well, I got out thanks to some boys that like I said, I was a Marine, but the boys that saved us out of Saigon were the boys, the river rats, that took us out in the little PT type boats and got us out in the harbor, out to the ships and all, and we got aboard.
What day was that? Was that the 30th? Was the 28th? Do you remember?
No, I really don't. It was the day before it was the day before most of us got out. It was a I'm not a very scary type person, but sir, I was scared to death, and everybody around me, whether they claimed to be or not claimed to be, was. It was vital to get out. It was vital to save your life and to save as many people with you as you could. Vietnam gets a rap it deserves, and it's not a good one. It's a bad one. But none of the soldiers in Vietnam, none of the Marines, none of the boys that got us in the helicopters, the person that saved more lives, and they don't like to say it, was Puff, the one that dropped the fire in the Agent Orange on us. They saved more lives on both sides than any of the rest of us did. Vietnam was a rough place, but the people in South Vietnam weren't traitors, and they were fighters. I was up in the hills with the minorities, and I was prisoner of war for a while till we got out and managed to get free. And I was liaison with Colonel Haywood and went back when they bombed the Pentagon. So I don't believe we should have ever been in Afghanistan. I believe the Special Forces and Marines should have went in and got him, got the main leaders and got out and came home.
Dalton, thanks for sharing some of your memories this morning. About 45 minutes left on the Washington Journal today. This is Bear. He's been waiting in Virginia Beach, Virginia, Republican. Go ahead.
Good morning. This is Bear from Virginia Beach. Just having input as a Republican. We had a mission after 9/11. Find the person responsible, hold them accountable. It was Osama bin Laden. He was found. His command was terminated. That was it. The military does what it does, and it is successful at it. Along the way, politicians get involved, business gets involved, money to be made, so you end up with mission creep. Let's keep people there. We should have been out 10 years ago when mission was realized. Everyone knew it. We stayed. Okay. The longer it takes, the longer it takes. We are paying for their policemen. We're paying for their soldiers. We're paying for their civil infrastructure. How long do we continue this? We're sitting here with a couple $1 trillion of an infrastructure bill. How do we get the Republicans and Democrats on the same page? Number one, let's pay for it. How do we pay for it? Well, we have to make a cut. We were already told we're leaving Afghanistan. That's going to be a big cut. There's a lot of finances and politics to this either way. We're a capitalist nation. That's how we function. The people that are left behind, what are we doing? The gnashing of teeth. We built a whole generation where women could read in a country where it was forbidden. We did some good work, but we can't stay there. There are nations in Asia, Africa, South America that we can help nation build. But right now, there's no end to this. We have to get out.
That's Bear in Virginia Beach. This is Sherry in Georgia, a Democrat. Good morning.
Hello.
Hi, Sherry.
Yes. I'm calling because I'm looking at the bigger picture, and I see that Afghanistan is going to be genocide may occur, but it won't be within its own people initially, maybe. But I see where China and Russia are already making plans to work with their government. China is aggressively securing territory, more land around the world. They're building islands into the waters in order to acquire more territory. Russia has also got a lot to gain. And eventually, when all this kind of dies down, they're going to take over Afghanistan. And those people won't have their country anymore. World War III has been on the verge for a long time, And this dealing with that in Afghanistan put it off for a little bit. But I believe that World War III is on its way because there's a limited number of resources in the world and we're overpopulated.
Sherry, on the issue of China and Afghanistan, this from Janice Mackey-Frayer, NBC News Asia correspondent, reporting this morning that China is saying that it's willing to forge, quote, friendly relations with the Taliban in Afghanistan. She says she asks if it meant recognition of the Taliban as the legitimate government there, but got no clear answer. China was given security assurances by the Taliban prior to its takeover of the country. Again, that reporting from NBC News this morning. Ian, Long Island Republican, good morning.
Good morning. The gentleman before just basically said a lot, but we who can hold the land, like Reagan said, we're a generation away from us being lost, or that people think the Indians had the land. The land belongs to the people who can hold it. Now, we won the war, like the gentleman said. We got Osama bin Laden. That was our goal. That was the mission. Now, to sit there and have Frank Biden or whoever come in and start building stuff as a contractor, like he said, this is where it gets messy. Our troops, if we're there 100 years, on the 101st year, the Taliban, they'll go hide in the Hindu Kush, Pakistan, they'll cross borders, and they'll come out, and then they'll take it again. So unless we're going to sit there forever and a day, sort of like the British when there was we would colonize places because they were constantly, whether we were trading and moving goods, we would have problems. Whether it's the same places, Libya today, we're having problems. So we sat there, and we had to sit there forever. And who wants to live there? You, me? Do you want to protect that region that has nothing to protect? And I feel so horrible that the good people that are there, like the ones that protected Marcus Luttrell, the lone survivor, everybody should watch the movie, that Pashtunwale, when they take someone in their home and they protect them. They're all good, but it seems they're outnumbered so great that we would have to sit there forever and lose our blood and our most precious of what we have to give to help the world. If we're getting blue on green crime still. They're still shooting us. We're training them to be cops, and then they turn on us. So we can't have that no more. And that China, I don't know if anybody knows. Taliban, to me, they're fundamentalists. That doesn't jive with China, and China and Russia can go there.
And we're going to break away from the end of this recorded program and take you live now over to the State Department. Spokesman Ned Price is holding a briefing on the situation in Afghanistan. Live coverage here on C-SPAN.
And what the United States is seeking to do in the coming hours and the coming days. Let me offer just a few additional details from the Department of State. The safety and security of U.S. government employees and U.S. citizens overseas is our top priority. All remaining U.S. direct hire embassy personnel, including the ambassador, have relocated to Hamid Karzai International Airport, where they are secure. The Department of Defense is working to restore a safe and secure environment so that military and commercial flights can resume. Now, of course, the situation is evolving quickly, and we will communicate information to U.S. citizens as rapidly as possible. In the meantime, we are asking U.S. citizens to shelter and not to travel to the airport until they hear otherwise from the Department of State. We also continue to pursue all options to relocate interested and qualified Afghan SIV applicants and their immediate families, as well as other vulnerable Afghans. We remain closely coordinated with our international partners on the ground and around the globe. We've been engaging tirelessly with our partners in the international community. You may have seen last night, the United States organized a joint statement with 98 signatories calling on all parties to respect and facilitate the safe and orderly departure of foreign nationals and Afghans who wish to leave the country. Today, Secretary Blinken spoke with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, PRC State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi, Pakistan Foreign Minister Qureshi, UK Foreign Secretary Raab, NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg, Turkish Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu, and EU High Representative Josep Borrell. Yesterday, he spoke with Australian Foreign Minister Payne, French Foreign Minister Le Drian, German Foreign Minister Maas, and Norwegian Foreign Minister Søreide. Other senior officials have been making calls to their counterparts as well around the clock. Additionally, the UN Security Council issued a joint press statement earlier today calling for a new government that is united inclusive, and representative, including with the full and meaningful participation of women. The Council spoke with one voice to underscore that Afghanistan must abide by its international obligations, including to international humanitarian law, and ensure the safety and security of all Afghans and international citizens. The situation will continue to remain fluid in the coming hours and likely in the coming days. Nevertheless, we are operating on multiple fronts and around the clock to protect our people, those who have worked side by side with the United States over the years, and other vulnerable Afghans. Now, before I take your questions, I do want to speak to one additional issue that is of great importance to us, and that is the U.S. response to the earthquake in Haiti. The United States is closely monitoring the situation following a magnitude 7.2 earthquake that struck the southwestern part of the country on August 14th. We offer our deepest condolences to all who suffered the loss of loved ones or saw their homes or businesses destroyed. We are in close contact with Haitian authorities to respond to the earthquake and any requests for assistance. On Saturday, USAID deployed a Disaster Assistance Response Team, or a DART, to lead the U.S. government's humanitarian response efforts. And yesterday, at the request of the government of Haiti, USAID deployed members of Fairfax County Fire Department's Urban Search and Rescue, USAR, a team to join the DART. So far, the DART conducted an aerial assessment and is continuing to assess the damage. They will also identify priority needs and coordinate with the government of Haiti and humanitarian partners. U.S. Coast Guard air crews are transporting medical personnel and supplies from Port-au-Prince to Jérémie and Le Cay, and are evacuating injured citizens to higher level of care facilities in Port-au-Prince. At the request of USAID, Southcom is sending 2 UH-60 and 2 CH-47 helicopters from Joint Task Force Bravo to provide critical airlift support to ongoing relief efforts. We are also closely tracking Tropical Storm Grace, which is expected to reach Haiti today, potentially exposing people to further devastation. The United States remains a close and enduring friend to the people of Haiti, and we will continue to provide assistance in the aftermath of this tragedy. We are committed to helping the Haitian people build a better future. With that, I'm happy to take your questions.
Thanks, Ned. Can I ask 2 real quick logistical ones, and I really hope they'll be real quick. One, other than the threat, I guess you could call it, to respond militarily if the Taliban interfere or get in the way of any of the evacuation efforts, is there any kind of agreement that's been reached, or any kind of an arrangement that has been reached with them about the presence of the U.S. military at the airport, or are they just basically there at kind of the pleasure of the Taliban, as it were, until they decide that they've had enough and they start, I don't know if they will or not, but whether they start to resist the fact that the airport is not under their control?
Well, let me take the opportunity to offer a bit of context on our diplomatic efforts over the past 72 or so hours. Ambassador Khalilzad and his team remained in Doha. They still remain in Doha, following consultations that we talked about last week with a number of countries from the region, the UN, and countries much farther afield. They continued, and they still continue, to engage with the Taliban. They continued to engage with the Islamic Republic, that is to say the government of Afghanistan representatives. When it became clear that the government of Afghanistan was on the verge of collapse, that President Ghani had fled, and that the Taliban were encroaching on Kabul, the focus, of course, changed. It shifted from supporting peace negotiations along with the international community to working assiduously and urgently to do all we can with the international community on an urgent basis to avert violence, to attempt to maintain order in Kabul, and very, very importantly, to guarantee that the Taliban would not seek to threaten our people or our operations. It was a very fluid situation. The situation changed markedly when President Ghani left the country and as the Taliban continued to encroach on Kabul. We do continue to engage with Taliban representatives in Doha from the State Department team. The U.S. military has spoken to engagement with the Taliban on the ground in Kabul. And again, we are working on a couple different fronts. First and foremost, to seek to preserve calm in Kabul, to maintain a semblance of security, and very importantly, to underscore that any effort, any attempt to target, to threaten, to intimidate our personnel or our operations would be met with a swift and decisive response.
Other than that, there's no agreement with the Taliban for the U.S. military to run the airport, to run the airspace, to be in control. And if there is an agreement, how long does that agreement last?
We have engaged with the Taliban. We have had discussions. I would say that some of those discussions have been constructive, but again, when it comes to the Taliban, we are going to look for their actions rather than listen to their words.
And then secondly, the logistical thing is on the embassy compound itself, which is now abandoned. Do you have you taken any measures to secure that place, or are you just basically letting is there a protecting power? Is it open area that anyone can get into now if they can get over the fence? Are you prepared to leave it just sit there?
Well, as you know, Matt, we confirmed last night that as of late night Eastern, all of our civilian personnel located at the embassy, Chief of Mission, those operating under Chief of Mission Authority, had safely relocated from the embassy compound to Hamid Karzai International Airport. As you also know, the embassy is in an area that has been heavily fortified. So we do not have an American presence on the ground.
Is there any presence?
We do not have an American presence on the ground at the embassy. Our ambassador is and has been at the embassy at the compound, the Hamid Karzai International Airport, since late last night, our time, and that remains the case.
Yeah, but there isn't any protecting power. There's nobody there. It's wide open for anyone who wants to go in there.
As you know,
regardless of whether it's in a built-up, barricaded area or not, you basically just took off and left it empty.
As you know, it is a heavily fortified area.
My last one is that in the Doha agreement, which the president mentioned several times as having kind of tied his hands, there are 16 times in that agreement where it refers to the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, which is not recognized by the United States as a state and is known as the Taliban. 16 times it mentions that. And you've said before that you will not recognize any government or assist any government that comes to power by force. Since the Taliban basically walked in to Kabul and the president fled, are you in a position to say whether or not you might be willing to recognize a government that emerges from this, aside from the UN calls?
Well, this is something that we have spoken to before. We have spoken to it before events of recent hours and recent days. Secretary Blinken spoke to this yesterday morning. We are still taking stock of what has transpired over the past 72 hours and the diplomatic and the political implications of that. We are, as you have seen in any number of venues, we are coordinating closely with Afghanistan's neighbors. As we've said, the Secretary, other senior officials in this building, our ambassadors in their respective capitals around the world have engaged governments in the region and much farther afield on an aligned approach to the evolving situation. And you've already started to see some of the fruits of that. I think most notably, and I mentioned this at the outset, you saw the statement that emanated from the UN Security Council. Obviously, the UN Security Council has a permanent set of members, several of whom are among our closest allies in the world, and a couple countries where our interests are rarely aligned. Nevertheless, this document, it is quite strong. It is quite clear. I think it is reflective of the broad consensus that has emerged from the international community about not only our thinking, what the United States may or may not do going forward as we assess ultimately what has come to pass, but what the international community will do. This statement says that the sustainable end to the conflict can only be achieved through an inclusive, just, durable, and realistic political settlement that upholds human rights, including for women, children, and minorities. The Security Council, speaking with one voice, which, as you know, is not always an easy feat, called on all parties to adhere to international norms and standards on human rights, and to call for an immediate cease to any abuses in that regard. Ultimately, when it comes to our posture towards any future government in Afghanistan, it will depend upon the actions of that government. It will depend upon the actions of the Taliban. We are watching closely, but as you heard from this UN Security Council statement, and as you've heard from any number of governments that have issued their own unilateral statements, the world is watching closely. The fact is that a future Afghan government that upholds the basic rights of its people, that doesn't harbor terrorists, and that protects the basic rights of its people, including the basic fundamental rights of half of its population, its women and girls, that is a government that we would be able to work with. The converse is also true. We are not going to support a government that does not do that, a government that disregards the rights, the guarantees enshrined in basic documents like the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. That is not a government that the United States would be able to work with. That itself is important. It becomes all the more important when you account for the fact that you have a statement from the UN Security Council that was adopted by all of its members that says exactly that. Andrea.
Following up on that and one other issue as well, social media is just filled with desperate appeals from girls, from women, Taliban going door to door, ripping girls out of their mothers' arms, women who have been told for 20 years they should get schooling, learn to code, learn to teach, become engineers, become doctors, become lawyers. It's simply heartbreaking. And the question remains, there are Democrats as well as Republicans on the Hill, including veterans of the Afghan war and Iraq wars, saying that there should have been arrangements made months ago, that before the withdrawal was signaled by the date in April, that for months we should have been moving people out. We should have been moving on the evacuation, not only of the special visas, but of other people as well, and that this chaotic vision of people, thousands of people at the airport, climbing onto C-17s as they are rolling down the tarmac was completely avoidable, given the withdrawal. Secondly, let me ask you about a question regarding the president's speech. He said that we can accomplish the mission we accomplished 10 years ago of not only getting, bin Laden, but preventing Afghanistan from becoming a haven for terrorists against the homeland, the original mission of 20 years ago, that we can accomplish this from over the horizon. Intelligence experts, including former Obama DCI, say that's just not true. That once the withdrawal was completed and Bagram dismantled and turned over and now taken over by the Taliban, we don't have eyes on the ground. That we cannot fight terror from over the horizon in a place like Afghanistan, as we perhaps do in other countries. If you could address both of those.
Let me take those questions in turn. Let me start with your first question. The images that we've all seen emanating from the international airport in Kabul, HKIA, they are searing, they are painful, they are difficult to see, they are difficult to watch. And I say that on a couple different levels. One, the most basic level, we are all human. We share a common humanity with these Afghans whose desperation, whose fear, whose concern is they wear it on their faces. And so on that level, it is deeply moving to all of us. There's another level, though, that I think is especially relevant to this building. I'm a relative newcomer here. I have spent 7 months here. There are people in this building, hundreds if not more, who have dedicated years and years of their lives to affecting a better life for the people of Afghanistan, including the women and girls. We have foreign service officers who have served multiple tours in Kabul in the 2 decades that the United States has been there. We have many more who have served in functions back here to support that mission. There are, and this I can speak personally to, there is a generation of public servants in this country who entered public service in the weeks, months, couple years after the 9/11 attacks. In my case, I was a freshman in college, and I knew on that day as I climbed to the roof of a dorm here in Washington and watched the smoke rise from the Pentagon that I wanted to pursue public service. So many of my colleagues have a similar story. It unites us. It unites many of us as public servants. So it's also painful on that level. Right now, what we are doing is a couple things. We are working around the clock in the first instance to maintain, to regain positive control over the airport compound. This is something that our colleagues at the Department of Defense have been working urgently to reestablish for a couple reasons. One, to be able to resume U.S. Military flights, and my colleague John Kirby will be briefing shortly, and he'll be able to give you an update on that. But importantly, this is also a civilian airport. We are seeking to reestablish positive control in order so that commercial travel can also resume, so that many of these Afghans whose images we have seen, whose images have been so searing, will be able to reach safety. In many cases, that will be with a helping hand from the United States government. We have spoken to our efforts on behalf of SIVs, so-called special immigrant visa applicants. You ask why we haven't done more. Let me just offer a bit of context. Through the course of this program, the United States has resettled, brought to their new lives, more than 75,000 Afghans who have, in various ways, assisted the United States government over the years. The Special Immigrant Visa Program provides, well, as it was initially conceived and legislated by Congress, it provides a visa to the United States. When this administration recognized that the security situation was becoming, was quickly evolving, many weeks ago, we launched Operation Allies Refuge. This was something that was never envisioned in any SIV program, including the one we had in Afghanistan or the one we had in Iraq. That is to say, a gargantuan U.S. effort not only to process, adjudicate, and to grant visas to these so-called special immigrants, but to actually bring them to the United States with a massive airlift operation. It's been through that operation that 2,000 Afghans have been able to reach the United States. Most of those Afghans have now been able to start their new lives through resettlement agencies. It was a month or so ago, we recognized that the need could be even greater for Afghans who were vulnerable, who may be at risk. That is precisely why we initiated a so-called Priority 2, P2, refugee status program that went beyond the statutory definitions of who could apply for and be eligible for the SIV program, to include those brave Afghans who not only have helped the US government over the years, but have helped the American people. We know that there are other vulnerable Afghans, some for the work they have done, some for the things they have said, some for nothing more than their gender. And we are also working and planning to bring as many as we can to safety. Right now, we are, again, in the process of reestablishing control over the airport. The military has been able to surge resources and will surge additional resources to the theater to allow us to bring on a large scale a number of these Afghans who will be able to start new lives in the United States, or who will be able to reach safety elsewhere in the world. We are committed to that. We have been flexible. We have been ambitious in our effort to do just that. You asked a second question about counterterrorism and what this means for our ability to detect and to thwart terrorist plotting. A couple points on that. Number one, the United States has built up the capacity to detect, disrupt terrorist plotting, terrorist networks in ways that were, in some cases, unimaginable prior to 9/11. That is to say, our tactics are effective, they are proven, and they go well beyond what this government would have been and was able to do prior to 9/11. We also recognize that the center of gravity of the threat we face from terrorist groups, whether it's Al-Qaeda, whether it's an Al-Qaeda affiliate, whether it's ISIS, whether it's an ISIS affiliate, it has shifted over the years. Of course, the center of gravity, the locus of activity, was in Afghanistan on September 11th, 2001. It hasn't been there in years. It hasn't been there in years precisely because we have been able to employ these effective tactics over the course of the past 20 years to do precisely what our forces went into Afghanistan to do in the first place. That is to decimate the network that launched, that conceived of, directed and launched the 9/11 attacks, and ensure that they can't regroup on Afghan soil. We are confident. But more importantly, the military and our intelligence community leaders have spoken and even testified to the fact that we will have capabilities in the theater, so-called over-the-horizon capabilities, that will allow us to use the technologies, to use the tactics that we have deployed and improved upon over the past 20 years to detect and to disrupt any terrorist plotting that may seek to reach our shores. We've also been very clear with the Taliban, and I said it just a moment ago, that the willingness of a future government of Afghanistan to allow any terrorist group to operate on its soil and to pose a threat to the United States, it's unacceptable to us, and we will demonstrate that using the fierce power of the U.S. military. Laura.
So to follow up on that, and also to let you know, I have kind of three buckets of questions. I'll be succinct in asking them. What is the, when the United States, when Ambassador Khalilzad talks to the Taliban and says, these are the actions we expect the Taliban to adhere to in order to be considered a legitimate government, what is your level of confidence that the Taliban will agree to that, especially when it comes to the fate of women and girls in Afghanistan? So that's question one. If you want to, I can give you the other ones.
Please.
Great. Okay. So number two, I'm curious about, you started off by saying that the State Department is urging, the embassy has urged Americans in Kabul to not come to the airport for evacuation, to shelter in place. But as we've discussed in this room, there are tens of thousands of Americans, probably dual citizens, who are spread across Afghanistan, who have no ability to get to the airport in Kabul in the first place. So what plan or what assurances can the United States offer them that they will not be left there, since they can't get to Kabul to even try to come to the airport? Third, when the Secretary spoke to President Ghani on Saturday, I'm curious if he knows where President Ghani was at that time, and if he was aware that President Ghani was was either going to flee the country or at least step down from government.
Let me take those in turn. Again, we have made very clear, abundantly clear to the Taliban in Doha, but in some ways just as importantly, publicly, speaking with a single voice with the international community, what the United States, what our closest allies and partners expect, but also what other regional stakeholders, again, including some stakeholders with whom we share very few interests, where our interests are rarely aligned. The fact that this UN Security Council statement emerged today is a clear indication that there is decisive consensus within the international community on this front. It means a lot when the United States says something and when we put our voice and actions behind a statement, but it means even more when much of the world and certainly the key stakeholders come together and say the same thing. We will be watching very closely as any new government in Afghanistan takes shape. Of course, we have all seen various statements that have emanated from the Taliban, not only in recent hours and recent days, but in recent weeks and recent months. We take those for what they are. They're statements. Again, we will be watching actions. That's what will be important to us. Beyond watching, beyond galvanizing the international community, as we did with the statement signed by 98 countries, from Albania to Zambia just last night, we are going to be marshaling the international community because we now know it is incumbent on all of us, including the United States, to use every conceivable lever that we have. Diplomacy, our political leverage, and importantly, economic leverage. And economic leverage can take different forms. It is patently obvious that the government of Afghanistan would not have endured 20 years were it not for the broad and generous support of the international community in the United States. The United States being the largest donor, both on a bilateral basis and to the humanitarian needs of the Afghan people. This is a positive source of leverage. If the Taliban, or any government that is to emerge, seeks to have the level of international assistance that was needed to sustain the Afghan government over the past 20 years, the words on the paper that emanated from New York today, from the Security Council, will have to mean something. That their actions will have to match some of the words that we have seen emanate from the Taliban. There are other forms of economic leverage, and those are, if you talk about carrots, you can also talk about sticks. And the United States, the UN, the international community, has the ability to impose fairly dramatic costs on any regime that were to take shape that does not recognize the basic and fundamental rights of the people of Afghanistan. Importantly, the basic and fundamental rights of half of the Afghan population, the women and girls. The United States, as I've said before, has done more than any country in the world over the last 20 years to support Afghanistan's women and girls. We are, you can believe, you can bet that we will do all we can. And I would muster to say probably lead the charge, certainly lead the charge in working with the international community to make sure and to see to it that we are doing everything we can, speaking with one voice and acting according to one script to preserve those gains, because they are that important to us. When it comes to Americans who, and others, I should say, who seek to leave the country, we have been in regular contact with American citizens in Kabul. The embassy is providing both public messages, is communicating via email with Americans who have indicated and expressed an interest in leaving the country. We will continue to provide clear messaging about what they should do and when they should do it. Again, people should shelter in place and not attempt to come to the airport until they are explicitly told otherwise by an appropriate authority, including the U.S. Embassy.
The question was about American citizens who are not in Kabul and can't get there in the first place. And then also, if you could talk to the Ghani question.
We are going to continue to do all we can to bring as many eligible individuals as we can to safety. When we talk about our priorities, our first priority is always going to be the American people. That is to say, the Americans who are serving and who have served in Afghanistan. That includes private American citizens, some of whom are in Kabul, many of whom are in Kabul, some of whom may not be in Kabul, of course. That also includes our locally engaged staff, that is to say Afghan nationals who were working in our embassy compound and who have expressed an interest in relocating. We have talked about SIVs. We have talked about so-called P1, those applying for P1 refugee status and P2 status, and then other vulnerable Afghans, people who may be exposed to risk because of the work they've done or merely because of their gender. Kylie.
The Ghani question?
The Secretary did have an opportunity to speak to President Ghani on Saturday and late last week. We read out that call. I don't think we have anything additional to offer.
He was leaving at the time the call happened. Did the Secretary have any heads up that the President was about to flee the country?
It was a very fluid situation. The security situation was evolving very quickly. The political situation was evolving very quickly. We'll leave it to President Ghani to characterize what he may have told the Secretary. We will leave it to him to characterize what he told the Secretary.
So no?
Please.
Is he?
There has not been a formal transfer of power. There has not been a formal transfer of power.
I guess, who does the United States recognize as the leader of Afghanistan then?
So this is something that we are working, again, with the international community. You saw in this statement from the UN a clear consensus emerge that a political settlement will be in everyone's interests, that a political settlement will be best positioned to achieve what it is manifestly in our collective interest. And by our, I mean the United States, I mean that of our allies and partners, but also importantly, probably most importantly, the interests of the people of Afghanistan. A political settlement is what we are still pushing for. We are not doing this alone. We are working in close collaboration with the international community. All throughout this process, together with the UN and our international partners, we have been supporting the Afghans in their intra-Afghan dialogue. That intra-Afghan dialogue remains ongoing. The Taliban continues to be represented in Doha. Representatives from the government of Afghanistan continue to be represented in Doha.
And just logistical questions about the SIVs. How many SIVs will the U.S. aim to relocate to the United States? And how many of those SIVs will the U.S. relocate before leaving the airport?
So we are going to maintain a diplomatic presence in Kabul for as long as it is safe and responsible for us to do so. You've heard from this president, you heard from him today, that his top priority is the safety and the security of the American people. And so we will seek to maintain a presence on the ground right now at the Hamid Karzai International Airport for as long as it is safe to do so. As I said before, DoD is working urgently around the clock to reestablish positive control over the airport so that both U.S. mil aircraft and commercial aircraft can land and take off. The U.S. mil aircraft is important for our SIV relocation efforts. The commercial side of the airport is also incredibly important for the capacity that it would lend for other third-party nationals, for Afghans, and anyone who may not be affiliated with a U.S. government program to be able to leave the country if they should choose to do so. So we are going to maintain a presence on the ground for as long as it is responsible and safe for us to do so. During that time, the Department of Defense, working in tandem with the Department of State, we will be working around the clock to relocate as many eligible individuals as we can. Rosalind.
So you don't want to give a specific number at this time?
So we're not in a position to give a specific number at this time because it is a fluid situation and it will be dependent on the security situation on the ground. The forcing function here, the guiding principle, will be the safety and security of our people. As long as we deem that our public servants serving at HKIA are safe and secure, we will be engaged in an ambitious and an aggressive and around-the-clock effort to relocate as many individuals as we possibly can. Rosalind.
I want to follow on that. How many U.S. citizens and possible dual citizens are in Afghanistan? There's a number floating around, about 10,000 or so. And then following on that, yes, the U.S. State Department is committed to taking care of U.S. citizens. I appreciate that personally. But if things really go sideways, is this government willing to not transport any Afghan citizens, any citizens who perhaps are working for NGOs or for the United Nations, and focus solely on getting Americans out? Should people be getting their hopes up, I guess is what I'm asking.
One, on the question of how many U.S. citizens may be in Afghanistan, it is not a tally that we keep in the context of Afghanistan or any other country. We have files. The embassy has been in touch with many of these individuals, but it is not a figure that is readily available to us, precisely for the reason that you mentioned. It is incumbent on Americans in any given country to reach out to the embassy, to notify the embassy of their presence. There are many dual nationals who are also part of the equation as well. So we're just not in a position to give a firm figure. When it comes to our relocation efforts, again, we are going to be guided by one criterion, and that is the safety and security of the American people. As long as the U.S. government, calling on all the information at our disposal, deems that it is safe for Americans to remain and to be operating on the airport compound, we are going to be engaged in this ambitious, in this aggressive, in this around-the-clock effort to relocate as many individuals as we possibly can. I'll take a couple final questions.
Nick Kristof, the New York Times columnist, said basically every person who ever cooperated with the U.S. in any form or fashion over the last 20 years, the U.S. should just round everyone up, get them out of harm's way, and then figure out the visa situation later. Is that an outside possibility?
Well, that's a generalization, obviously, but it is not that dissimilar from what we are engaged in. As I said before, there are several different classes of individuals. We are, on an urgent basis, making preparations to relocate. In the case of SIVs, that has been in process for some time now. In terms of other individuals, some 1,600 individuals, not including the 2,000 SIVs, have been airlifted out of Afghanistan on U.S. military aircraft in recent days. We are, of course, prioritizing American citizens. We are, of course, first and foremost, Americans who had been serving at our embassy who are departing the country, private American citizens, SIV holders, P1, P2 applicants, as well as other vulnerable Afghans. We have stood up a task force here at Maine State. It is operating 24/7. It is coordinating the department's planning, management, logistics related to this rather large, rather complex and undeniably urgent operation. There are Acting Assistant Secretary Dean Thompson, the Acting Assistant Secretary of our Bureau of South and Central Asia, is heading that task force. There are multiple subcomponents of that task force. They are all being led by senior department officials. The various lines of effort include SIV relocation, logistics, embassy staff, U.S. citizens, Afghans at risk. This is, again, an ambitious, aggressive effort to bring to safety as many individuals who might be interested in doing so for as long as we can. Will.
Yeah, does that 1,600 include American embassy personnel? Have any of those left? How many of those are at Hamid Karzai Airport? And are there other U.S. personnel who don't respond, don't up to the chief of mission, who are not at the airport but at other parts of the city? Just wondering for kind of a breakdown, as best as you know it, or as of a given time, how many American personnel are at the airport, how many have left, how many might still be in the city?
As you know, whether the context is Afghanistan or whether the context is a less challenging, less complex security environment, we typically don't offer breakdowns like that. As we said last night, all of the Americans under Chief of Mission Authority who had been operating at the embassy had been safely relocated to Hamid Karzai International Airport. It is also worth noting that our efforts to reduce the civilian footprint of our embassy, they did not start last week or the week before or even last month. April 27th, the U.S. Embassy went on ordered departure. Since April 27th, we have conducted several drawdowns to responsibly reduce the size of our civilian footprint. So the size of our embassy prior to that ordered departure was much larger, certainly larger than it was a week or two ago. So this has been a phased. Again, we don't offer numbers when it comes to this, but it has been a phased and deliberate drawdown of U.S. personnel. I know my colleague at the Pentagon is going to be briefing, so I'm going to cede he has started. So I will cede the floor to him. Thank you all very much. We'll see you tomorrow.
Hey, Ned, on that number, so does that mean 3,600 total are at 2,000 SIVs and families, and then the 1,600 you just mentioned?
That's right.
So 3,600 now since the SIV thing.
Since SIVs began, correct.
Since when?
Since the 1,600 over the last year. Good, how are you?
Just making sure you know what you're saying. For the record for
well, the SIVs, so after
President Biden spoke about events unfolding in Afghanistan as the U.S. troop withdrawal comes to a close. It was his first public address on the situation since the Taliban gained control of Kabul. From the White House, this is 20 Minutes.
Good afternoon. I want to speak today to the unfolding situation in Afghanistan, the developments that have taken place in the last week, and the steps we're taking to address the rapidly evolving events. My national security team and I have been closely monitoring the situation on the ground in Afghanistan and moving quickly to execute the plans we had put in place to respond to every constituency, including and contingency, including the rapid collapse we're seeing now. I'll speak more in a moment about the specific steps we're taking, but I want to remind everyone how we got here and what America's interests are in Afghanistan. We went to Afghanistan almost 20 years ago with clear goals. Get those who attacked us on September 11, 2001, and make sure al-Qaeda could not use Afghanistan as a base from which to attack us again. We did that. We severely degraded al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. We never gave up the hunt for Osama bin Laden, and we got him. That was a decade ago. Our mission in Afghanistan was never supposed to have been nation building. It was never supposed to be creating a unified, centralized democracy. Our only vital national interest in Afghanistan remains today what it has always been: preventing a terrorist attack on America's homeland. I've argued for many years that our mission should be narrowly focused on counterterrorism, not counterinsurgency or nation building. That's why I opposed the surge when it was proposed in 2009 when I was vice president. And that's why, as president, I'm adamant that we focus on the threats we face today in 2021, not yesterday's threats. Today, the terrorist threat has metastasized well beyond Afghanistan. Al-Shabaab in Somalia, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, al-Nusra in Syria, ISIS attempting to create a caliphate in Syria and Iraq, and establishing affiliates in multiple countries in Africa and Asia. These threats warrant our attention and our resources. We conduct effective counterterrorism missions against terrorist groups in multiple countries where we don't have permanent military presence. If necessary, we'll do the same in Afghanistan. We've developed counterterrorism over-the-horizon capability that will allow us to keep our eyes firmly fixed on the direct threats to the United States and the region, and act quickly and decisively if needed. When I came into office, I inherited a deal that President Trump negotiated with the Taliban. Under his agreement, U.S. forces would be out of Afghanistan by May 1, 2021, just a little over 3 months after I took office. U.S. forces had already drawn down during the Trump administration from roughly 15,500 American forces to 2,500 troops in country. And the Taliban was at its strongest militarily since 2001. The choice I had to make as your president was either to follow through on that agreement or be prepared to go back to fighting the Taliban in the middle of the spring fighting season. There would have been no ceasefire after May 1. There was no agreement protecting our forces after May 1. There was no status quo of stability without American casualties after May 1. There was only the cold reality of either following through on the agreement to withdraw our forces or escalating the conflict and sending thousands more American troops back into combat in Afghanistan, lurching into the third decade of conflict. I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw U.S. forces. That's why we're still there. We were clear-eyed about the risks. We planned for every contingency, but I always promised the American people that I would be straight with you. The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated. So what's happened? Afghanistan political leaders gave up and fled the country. The Afghan military collapsed, sometime without trying to fight. If anything, the developments of the past week reinforced that ending U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan now was the right decision. American troops cannot and should not be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight for themselves. We spent over $1 trillion. We trained and equipped an Afghan military force with some 300,000 strong, incredibly well equipped, a force larger in size than the militaries of many of our NATO allies. We gave them every tool they could need. We paid their salaries, provided for the maintenance of their Air Force, something that Taliban doesn't have. Taliban does not have an Air Force. We provided close air support. We gave them every chance to determine their own future. We could not provide them was the will to fight for that future. There's some very brave and capable Afghan special forces units and soldiers. But if Afghanistan is unable to mount any real resistance to the Taliban now, there is no chance that 1 year, 1 more year, 5 more years, or 20 more years of U.S. military boots on the ground would have made any difference. And here's what I believe to my core. It is wrong to order American troops to step up when Afghanistan's own armed forces would not. If the political leaders of Afghanistan were unable to come together for the good of their people, unable to negotiate for the future of their country when the chips were down, they would never have done so while U.S. troops remained in Afghanistan, bearing the brunt of the fighting for them. And our true strategic competitors, China and Russia, would love nothing more than the United States to continue to funnel billions of dollars in resources and attention into stabilizing Afghanistan indefinitely. When I hosted President Ghani and Chairman Abdullah at the White House in June, and again when I spoke by phone to Ghani in July, we had very frank conversations. We talked about how Afghanistan should prepare to fight their civil wars after the U.S. military departed, to clean up the corruption in government so the government could function for the Afghan people. We talked extensively about the need for Afghan leaders to unite politically. They fail to do any of that. I also urged them to engage in diplomacy, to seek a political settlement with the Taliban. This advice was flatly refused. Mr. Ghani insisted the Afghan forces would fight, but obviously he was wrong. So I'm left again to ask of those who argue that we should stay, how many more generations of America's daughters and sons would you have me send to fight Afghanistan's civil war when Afghan troops will not? How many more lives, American lives, is it worth? How many endless rows of headstones at Arlington National Cemetery? I'm clear on my answer. I will not repeat the mistakes we've made in the past. Mistake of staying and fighting indefinitely in a conflict that is not in the national interest of the United States, of doubling down on a civil war in a foreign country, of attempting to remake a country through the endless military deployments of U.S. forces. Those are the mistakes we cannot continue to repeat because we have significant vital interest in the world that we cannot afford to ignore. I also want to acknowledge how painful this is to so many of us. The scenes we're seeing in Afghanistan, they're gut-wrenching, particularly for our veterans, our diplomats, humanitarian workers, for anyone who has spent time on the ground working to support the Afghan people, for those who have lost loved ones in Afghanistan, and for Americans who have fought and served in the country, serve our country in Afghanistan. This is deeply, deeply personal. It is for me as well. I've worked on these issues as long as anyone. I've been throughout Afghanistan during this war, while the war was going on, from Kabul to Kandahar to the Kunar Valley. I've traveled there on 4 different occasions. I've met with the people. I've spoken to the leaders. I spent time with our troops. And I came to understand firsthand what was and was not possible in Afghanistan. So now we're focused on what is possible. We will continue to support the Afghan people. We will lead with our diplomacy, our international influence, and our humanitarian aid. We'll continue to push for regional diplomacy and engagement to prevent violence and instability. We'll continue to speak out for the basic rights of the Afghan people, of women and girls, just as we speak out all over the world. I've been clear, the human rights must be the center of our foreign policy, not the periphery. But the way to do it is not through endless military deployments. It's with our diplomacy, our economic tools, and rallying the world to join us. Well, let me lay out the current mission in Afghanistan. I was asked to authorize, and I did, 6,000 U.S. troops to deploy to Afghanistan for the purpose of assisting in the departure of U.S. and allied civilian personnel from Afghanistan, and to evacuate our Afghan allies and vulnerable Afghans to safety outside of Afghanistan. Our troops are working to secure the airfield and to ensure continued operation of both the civilian and military flights. We're taking over air traffic control. We have safely shut down our embassy and transferred our diplomats. Our diplomatic presence is now consolidated at the airport as well. Over the coming days, we intend to transport out thousands of American citizens who have been living and working in Afghanistan. We'll also continue to support the safe departure of civilian personnel, the civilian personnel of our allies who are still serving in Afghanistan. Operation Allies Refugee, which I announced back in July, has already moved 2,000 Afghans who are eligible for special immigration visas and their families to the United States. In the coming days, the U.S. military will provide assistance to move more SIV-eligible Afghans and their families out of Afghanistan. We're also expanding refugee access to cover other vulnerable Afghans who worked for our embassy. U.S. non-governmental agencies or U.S. non-governmental organizations and Afghans who otherwise are at great risk, and U.S. news agencies. I know there are concerns about why we did not begin evacuating Afghans civilians sooner. Part of the answer is some of the Afghans did not want to leave earlier, still hopeful for their country. And part of it because the Afghan government and its supporters discouraged us from organizing a mass exodus to avoid triggering, as they said, a crisis of confidence. American troops are performing this mission as professionally and as effectively as they always do, but it is not without risks. As we carry out this departure, we have made it clear to the Taliban, if they attack our personnel or disrupt our operation, the U.S. presence will be swift and the response will be swift and forceful. We will defend our people with devastating force if necessary. Our current military mission will be short in time, limited in scope, and focused in its objectives. Get our people and our allies to safety as quickly as possible. And once we have completed this mission, we will conclude our military withdrawal. We will end America's longest war after 20 long years of bloodshed. The events we're seeing now are sadly proof that no amount of military force would ever deliver a stable, united, secure Afghanistan, as known in history as the graveyard of empires. What's happening now could just as easily happen 5 years ago or 15 years in the future. We have to be honest. Our mission in Afghanistan is taking many missteps, made many missteps over the past 2 decades. I'm now the 4th American president to preside over war in Afghanistan. 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. I will not pass this responsibility on to a 5th president. I will not mislead the American people by claiming that just a little more time in Afghanistan will make all the difference. Nor will I shrink from my share of responsibility for where we are today and how we must move forward from here. I am President of the United States of America, and the buck stops with me. I'm deeply saddened by the facts we now face, but I do not regret my decision to end America's warfighting in Afghanistan and maintain a laser focus on our counterterrorism missions there and other parts of the world. Our mission to degrade the terrorist threat of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and kill Osama bin Laden was a success. Our decades-long effort to overcome centuries of history and permanently change and remake Afghanistan was not, and I wrote and believed it never could be. I cannot and will not ask our troops to fight on endlessly in another country's civil war, taking casualties, suffering life-shattering injuries, leaving families broken by grief and loss. This is not in our national security interest. It is not what the American people want. It is not what our troops, who have sacrificed so much over the past 2 decades, deserve. I made a commitment to the American people when I ran for president that I would bring America's military involvement in Afghanistan to an end. While it's been hard and messy, and yes, far from perfect, I've honored that commitment. More importantly, I made a commitment to the brave men and women who serve this nation that I wasn't going to ask them to continue to risk their lives in a military action that should have ended long ago. Our leaders did that in Vietnam when I got here as a young man. I will not do it in Afghanistan. I know my decision will be criticized, but I would rather take all that criticism than pass this decision on to another President of the United States, yet another one, a 5th one, because it's the right one, it's the right decision for our people, the right one for our brave service members who risk their lives serving our nation, and it's the right one for America. Thank you. May God protect our troops, our diplomats, and all brave Americans serving in harm's way.
Mr. President, what do you make of the Afghans clinging to the aircraft?
How can you take no questions on this?
Okay, guys, we have to leave now. Thank you.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we take your calls live on the air on the news of the day, and we discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Tuesday morning, we'll discuss the fall of Afghanistan with Wesley Morgan, military journalist and author of The Hardest Place, the American military adrift in Afghanistan's Pesh Valley. Watch C-SPAN's Washington Journal, live at 7 Eastern, Tuesday morning. Be sure to join the discussion with your phone calls, Facebook comments, text messages, and tweets.
Even more on the situation in Afghanistan. The author of this op-ed, one of the 2 authors, H.R. McMaster, former White House National Security Advisor from 2017